Good evening, everybody, and welcome to this meeting of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee. My name is Councillor Paul Heath, and I am the chairman of this committee. This meeting has been called as part of the Council's call-in procedure to deal with the call-in of the Cabinet decision in respect of the Garden Green Waste Collection Service. No other business will be considered this evening. I would like to welcome all members in attendance this evening. In addition to the members of the committee, we also have with us this evening the Cabinet and those members who have called in the decision. Thank you for taking your time to be with us this evening, and I will now go through a few items of housekeeping before we proceed. We are not expecting a fire alarm this evening, but should one sound, please can members use the exit to the rear of the chamber and assemble in the car park. Mobile phones and devices should be switched to silent so as not to interrupt the meeting. Members, please can I ask that if you wish to speak, you indicate so by raising your hand, and I will come to you at the appropriate time. Please can I remind everyone to use their microphones when speaking and to switch them off when they are finished. This meeting is being webcast as a live broadcast, and recording of this meeting will also be available on the Council's YouTube channel. I will now proceed with the main business of the meeting. Item number 1, apologies for absence. We have received apologies from the following committee members. Councillor Justin Wrench. Councillor Wrench has given notice in accordance with the Constitution to the Governance Service and has arranged for Councillor George Prime to attend in his absence. Are there any further apologies?
Chairman, Councillor Bond has also given apologies. Thank you.
If there are no further apologies, I will proceed with item 2, which is the declaration of interest. Members, before I proceed with this item, please can I remind committee members that if they are signatories to the call-in notice, which will be considered under agenda item 5, they may not participate in that item. They may, however, participate in the limited capacity as a call-in member. In such instances, I would expect those that this applies to make such a declaration this evening. Does any committee member have any disclosable pecuniary interest, other pecuniary interest or non-pecuniary interest that they wish to declare this evening? Please state the item and the nature of your interest.
No declarations, Chairman. Please proceed to the next item of business.
Okay. If there are no more declarations, I will proceed to item number 3, minutes of the previous meeting. Members, there is no business to consider under this item, so we will move on to agenda item number 4, public question time. Members, we have one registered speaker this evening, Mr. Anthony Badger of Rivenall. In the absence of Mr. Badger, I have agreed for the Governance Officer to read out his questions. I would like to advise that whilst questions are usually questions addressed to the committee, due to the nature of this evening's meeting and the nature of the questions, I will invite Cabinet members who are in attendance this evening to consider the questions and provide a response.
Thank you, Chairman. The questions read as follows. The first question: how is the costing arrived at? If the Council's budget doesn't allow the garden waste collection to continue without charge, how can the first year be offered at an early bird rate? The second question: Council taxpayers received a rebate recently. Why wasn't this used to fund the service and the rebate only provided to those without a green bin? The third question: as this item has been called in, why hasn't the Council website been updated to reflect this? It is misleading to not indicate that this discussion is taking place. The fourth question: why is it not possible to pay by instalments or receive a refund if a subscriber moves out of the district? The Council will not incur the cost of operation all at once, so it is unreasonable not to offer instalments. Not giving a refund results in the Council potentially collecting payment twice for the same property. And the fifth and final question: why and how has this been approved? It appears to be at odds with what was indicated before the last local elections. Thank you, Chairman. That is the end of the question.
Thank you, Jess, for reading out those questions. Could I ask if the Cabinet are able to respond to the questions now, or do they wish to wait until the next part of the agenda? Councillor Butland.
Chairman, I think there are several parts of that which probably will come out in the debate this evening. If there are any items which are not covered in response, we will write personally to the questioner so that it's got detailed answers.
Thank you. We now proceed to agenda item 5, Cabinet key decisions, options for the future of garden waste collection service. Members, for this item, we'll be following the procedure which Kim Mayo outlined in her email sent on the 28th of July, which I will reiterate for you now. First, I must remind the committee that it must limit its consideration of the notices to the reasons stated within each of the call-in notices. No new matters may be introduced. This item will be set out in two parts. The first part will be the opportunity for the committee to hear from all parties, and the second part will be the committee's consideration of the matter, including reaching a decision as to whether we wish to ask the Cabinet to reconsider its decision or not. Part 1 will commence with the call-in members explaining their objection to the decision and the reasons for the call-in against each of the criteria as set out in the scrutiny rules under CPR 17.16, including details of what areas of consideration they believe the Cabinet did not take into account at the time of their decision. This will be followed by the Cabinet setting out the reasons behind their decision. At my discretion, I will allow questions from all parties, and I may ask for the officers in attendance to provide clarification to assist the committee's understanding of the issues. Questions will be taken after each party has addressed the committee, following which we will move into part 2 of the meeting. This part is only for the committee to debate the merits of the notices. The remaining parties are welcome to stay and watch the debate, but will not be able to participate unless there is a question or point of clarification which requires their clarification. However, this will be limited to providing a response only and will only be permitted at my discretion. At the end of part 2, the committee will decide whether to ask the Cabinet to reconsider its decision, and this will be determined by way of simply vote of the committee members. I trust this is clear and we may proceed. Thank you. Part 1. I would like to commence with part 1 and with the Labour Group, Councillor Finkin, as you were the spokesperson at the informal meeting. Would you like to start? Please can I remind you that you are confined to your notice. You can amplify what you have stated, but you may not introduce new matters. Councillor Finkin, please.
Thank you, Chair. Right, the Labour Group has brought this call-in request on 3 grounds, and I'll go through each of them in turn. The first ground is that the decision-maker has failed to consult relevant people or bodies in contravention of defined council policies or procedures. The Labour Group understands that the collection of garden waste is not a statutory service, and hence there is no statutory obligation to hold a consultation. But if this is the case, the Head of Governance has stated that the Council would consider whether it is necessary to undertake a consultation. That is dependent on the circumstances. The circumstances in this case are that this is a key decision on a major policy change for a highly successful and popular service of 21 years standing. Apparently, the main reason given for not holding a consultation is that the Cabinet knew that most residents would be opposed to the proposals. But that's not a good reason for not holding a consultation. It depends on how the consultation is framed. For example, a consultation would give an opportunity for residents to raise legitimate concerns. It would present information to residents about the balance between raising council tax, a range of alternative options for changing the organisation of waste management, or charging for the new scheme. It would also have enabled the Council to gain more accurate information about the likely take-up in this district of the subscription service in the first year, rather than just relying on benchmarking with other local councils or financial modelling, as appears to be the case. There has also been a failure to consult key stakeholder organisations, such as those that represent vulnerable groups, like the elderly, the disabled and the less well-off. Such organisations as charities, churches, schools and nurseries, which may be affected by the changes, have also not been consulted. The second ground on which we have brought the call-in request is that the decision is not consistent with council policy. The Labour group has consistently pointed out that the decision to charge residents for the collection of garden waste is not consistent with the council policies on combating the climate emergency and achieving recycling targets. Usage of the scheme is projected to drop from 88% at present to only 10% of households in the first year of operation, and only 26% even by the third year of operation. The report to Cabinet states that the tonnage of garden waste collected will reduce, and this will impact on the Council's overall recycling performance. The introduction of charges for garden waste is likely to result in a fall in that garden waste from 19% of total waste to about 3.5% in the first year, and a fall in overall recycling yields from about 47%, which is not that good already, to only about 35%. A substantial fall when Council's policy is to increase recycling levels to 60% now and to 75% by 2030 as part of its commitment to fulfil its climate emergency commitments. So what is the Council's strategy for reaching its targets in these circumstances? The third ground on bringing the call in is that the decision maker did not take into account relevant considerations or other material factors, and therefore the decision is unreasonable. Our challenge in this case is that the Cabinet did not give sufficient weight to the Council's corporate policies on the climate emergency and recycling commitments when making the decision. It was based entirely on the financial grounds. It's certainly true, as Councillor Cunningham has said, that there are many other strands to the Council's climate change policies. But is this the right time to be taking such a major step backwards on recycling as the world is burning? Our challenge is also that the Council did not take sufficient account of the effect of the decision on vulnerable residents, such as the elderly, the disabled, and the less well off. The suggestion that they should turn to home composting or taking their garden waste to the recycling centre takes little or no account of the ability of residents in these groups to carry out these tasks. There has been no attempt to address in a realistic way the genuine concerns of residents, and therefore the decision is unreasonable. Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, and I tell you to put your microphone on. Thank you, Councillor Finkin. Are there any other members of the Labour group that wish to speak? Councillor Jeffries, please.
Thank you, Chair. I think the fact that this is a first call-in notice for at least 10 years, nobody can quite remember when the last one was, is a reflection of the strong feeling of our members and our local community. I think one of the things about consultation, not just with the general public, and of course the monitoring officer has told us that there's no requirement to consult for a non-statutory service, but members feel they haven't been consulted. I know that the charge has been considered since 2018. The decision, however, was taken at the first meeting of the Cabinet of the new administration with a very new membership, with over half the council being newly elected. Many were not members of the council during the budget setting process between October 22 and February 23, nor the Cabinet meeting of the 13th of March. I was at the Cabinet meeting on the 10th of July at the invitation of the leader, where I could speak against the policy, but of course didn't have a vote. It was unfortunate that this meeting also clashed with other non-BDC important meetings, so other people could not be there. I take the point that non-Cabinet members could have attended the Cabinet meeting, but They were still very new to the process and unaware that they could come and ask questions at these meetings. If nothing else, the call-in notice has given the opportunity for the wider council to engage with the process, and the general public have also had a chance to comment. We have seen the questions tonight, but I know also that the post on the Braintree District Council Facebook page has had over 500 people commenting. At a time when we are trying to increase food recycling by delivering food waste bags, the policy doesn't sit well with people. I was a member of the council when the curbside recycling was introduced, and I remember that we were surprised by the enthusiastic way this was received, making it easy for people, which helped with the participation, and it remains a highly valued service by residents. I think that by being able to participate in this small way, people can see it as they can see how they can contribute to the climate change and might get them thinking about other ways that they can get engaged with environmental issues. As Councillor Finken said, before May's District Council elections, I'm sure residents across the district welcomed the help of the £25 provided from the New Homes and Growth Dividend on the 20th of February to help with the cost of living crisis. But now after the elections, it's disappeared if they decide to carry on with a service that they already get, even at the discounted rate of £27.50. I very much appreciate that this has been a difficult position for the Cabinet. They have held off from making the decision while waiting for the Government to clarify a national policy on the collection of household waste. So I do understand it's been difficult. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jeffries. Right, please, can I move on to... Sorry. Please can I move to the Independent and Green Group? Councillor Abbott, as you were the spokesperson at the informal meeting, would you like to start? Please can I remind you that you are confined to your notice. You can amplify what you have stated, but you may not introduce new matters. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I will do that, but I assume we can refer to the officer report as we did for the informal meeting, because that introduces matters which need responding to, yes. So in terms of the first criteria of consultation, as has been said by the Labour Group call-in members, there is very great public interest in this issue. There's a petition got up and there's very active concern on social media. However, we would note that just before the elections, members of the public in Whitton were informed by candidates for the administration group that the green bin charge had been cancelled. So in terms of consultation, that's not very good. As has already been said, this is the first call-in for many years at BDC. However, the officer report says that this matter has been discussed since 2018. However, for those of us who have been here throughout, it was only in late 2022 that any form of detail or commitment to charging for green bins from the administration emerged. So whatever discussions have been going on since 2018, the majority of members of this council were not privy to them. Reference is also made in the officer report to the budget scrutiny process, and yes, there was, and there always is a good budget scrutiny process at this council. However, in this instance, it wasn't good on this particular matter, because things like the incremental annual increase for the charge, the impact on recycling levels, and the impact on recycling credits were not discussed, and there was no information available on that. Suggestions made in the officer report that the Independent and Green Group concerns are not evidenced. Well, the evidence in our call-in is quoting from the Cabinet report. We haven't introduced any statistics which are not in the Cabinet report. Reference is also made, and I think this is a key point, Mr Chairman, to other options. If the Cabinet had, in its internal deliberations with officers, discussed other options, again, members of the wider membership of the Council has not seen them. And I think that's a key part, if this is referred back, that should be open to review. The officer report mentions discretionary measures not being current practice. Well, we would suggest they should be, maybe in this instance, considered as practice. Braintree District Council is supposed to be a go-ahead council, so let's look at discretionary measures. There's mention of the fortnightly cost in terms of £1 or something, or £2 something in 2 and 3 years and onwards, but that's significantly more than the £25 discount given before the election through the council tax process. So in terms of further detail on those points, we now know from the Cabinet decision made a few weeks ago that the intention is to increase the charge from £50, albeit with an early bird discount, to £55, then £55, then going up to £60 and £65 in year 3. That's a key issue about consultation. That was not consulted on. The public were not consulted on that, members weren't. We now know from the Cabinet report that there will be a significant fall in recycling performance. That was not consulted upon. And we now know that the loss of recycling credits will be nearly £1 million over the first 3 years. That was not consulted upon. The Council's external comms and indeed the Cabinet report refer to the current system as being disproportionate. We would argue that what's being proposed is disproportionate and that the current system is actually a very good one. Most residents would, we feel, believe that they pay for the service through their current council tax. And information we got from officers, I think it was late last year, is that 88% of households use the current system. There was no mention in the Cabinet report of that 88% figure. It is almost a universal service, but yet that is predicted to fall to between 10% in year 1 and 26% in year 3 take-up rate. In terms of the second criteria, decision not consistent with council policy, the corporate objectives, which I will quote. First one, a sustainable environment and a great place to live, work and play. And yet the Cabinet decision will significantly impact on recycling rates, and it is unknown as to how much bulk green waste could be diverted to landfill via the green bins. And given that in year 1 the projection is the collapse rate will be 60%, more than 60% of all properties that currently use the green bins will no longer do so. There's a significant risk of diversion to grey bins, which does not meet the sustainable environment criteria. There are also many other details, such as the fact the Cabinet report doesn't mention the types of waste that might go in the green bins, such as woody hedge and small tree branches. Those are not readily compostable, as the Cabinet report suggests people should do. There's no mention of the balance between, yes, there may be fewer waste freighters on the road, but there's likely to be more cars and vans for people trying to get rid of material at the recycling centres. In terms of the criteria in the Council's corporate objectives of a high-performing organisation that delivers excellent value for money, the Braintree District curbside system is, as the Labour Group has said, is a very mature one. It's been around for many, many years. It's very well embedded, and yet we're now going to have this shock to the system. It cannot surely be called an excellent value for money service to charge people for something that most people already use, and the result of that charging for the system to pretty much collapse to perhaps a quarter of what the current levels are. In terms of the criteria delivering better outcomes for residents and businesses and reducing costs to taxpayers, we would particularly draw attention to the impact on vulnerable members of society. The suggestion is that vulnerable members of society, such as the more elderly residents and people with disabilities, can use their neighbour's green bin. But if the rates are going to fall to just 10%, there could be households either side of a vulnerable resident who are not using green bins at all. What are they supposed to do? Find someone 4 or 5 doors down? And that assumes, of course, they have that relationship with their neighbour in order to do that. clearly that is not, quotes, a better outcome for those vulnerable members of our society. And it's very difficult to see how, in the round, it is, quote, fairer, the new system compared to the established one. In terms of going back to the main criteria of what a call-in can be, the criteria of the decision maker did not take into account relevant considerations, and therefore the decision is unreasonable. The Cabinet report actually failed to set out the history of recycling in this council and the relevant trajectory. Councillor Finkin referred to a figure of less than 50% for recycling, but actually in some years it's been higher than that. Why was only a part year, 23-4, quoted as a comparison when we're not even through half the year? You would have thought that maybe the last 3 or the last 5 years the comparison would have been made. There's also no analysis of the likely split of diversion of where this material will go. And, I mean, yes, the officer report says it's conjecture, and it is to some extent, but we don't know how much will go in grey bins. We don't know how much will be taken to recycling centres. We don't know how much might end in bonfires. We just don't know. Where is the analysis of what might be happening? We're told that this whole thing's been benchmarked. Well, presumably, all of those statistics could be available through a wider benchmarking process. In terms of options, there were 3 options put to Cabinet, but in effect, as we've said in our call in detail, there was only one real option, because one of the options was to stay as we are. Well, the report already said it was unsustainable. One of the options was to scrap the system. Well, goodness only knows how that would have gone down with the public if the Cabinet just suddenly decided to do that. And the other option was to do what was in the report. So no other options were really looked at. And I think if this is referred back, that's got to be a key area of research. We do believe the Cabinet decision is premature. Yes, it's quite right to say the government has been holding off making a decision on what the new regulations will be, but they may still do so in the next year. And so another potential option is to defer, to wait to see if that happens. In terms of the criteria, the decision is contrary to a previously agreed decision made by the Council. We do feel this is a very strong criteria because the Council has agreed to a 60% recycling target, but more recently the Independent and Green proposal was supported by the Council of a 75% target. As Councillor Finkin says, this takes us in the opposite direction, drastically so, to well below 40% recycling. The officer report, again, I will say this again, it says there's no evidence of this, but we've quoted the Cabinet report, which says recycling rates will fall to the 30%. There is also a wider point about the Council's commitment to tackling climate change. If a higher proportion of green waste ends up in the grey bin stream, that will end up in landfill. And in landfill, it will produce more carbon dioxide and methane, which are the 2 primary greenhouse gases. There is no analysis of how much extra that might be, and there should be if we're talking about detail on climate change. So finally, Mr. Chairman, the final criteria is we believe there are elements of the decision which are inconsistent with... the final part is to refer to Article 7 of the Constitution, and we think there are elements here where the constitutional principles have not been met. The first one is the action taken will be proportionate to the desired income. I keep saying that, desired outcome. For the reasons I've said, we don't believe there are. We believe the impacts are disproportionate to what's being achieved. What is sought to be achieved is a balance for the income coming in to meet the service. But we're saying the impacts cascade way beyond that into lots of other things. The second thing we believe meets the Constitution is the consultation element, and I've already been through that. The third issue is regards to human rights and the rights of individuals against the public good. We've talked about people with vulnerabilities. The fourth criteria is to do with open, transparent decision making. I've already said we don't believe it has been, that these very important details were literally sprung on the bulk of councillors here and the public when the decision was made by the Cabinet and were not subject to earlier consultation. And the fifth criteria is clarity in the aim and desired outcome. We don't believe there is clarity, and as I've already said, we believe the desired outcome is not even definite. That there's talk in the report of break-even only being by year 3 of this new charging system. And finally, that explanations of the options considered and given for reasons of choices made, we've never seen any other options that the Cabinet might have looked at. So in conclusions, Mr Chairman, some of the areas where this could be referred back are a deferral to wait for government regulations, or looking at other options including the charging rate and the trajectory taking into account other factors such as the significant loss of recycling credits, seeking to minimise the reduction in recycling. Yes, there may be some, but surely we might be able to do better in reducing it. Definitely seeking more assistance to more vulnerable residents, and a more detailed consideration of net climate change impacts. So we believe there are plenty of grounds for referring this back to Cabinet. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Are there any other members of the ING group that wish to speak? Yep.
Can you just clarify? This is the only chance to speak for us. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Chairman, sorry, could I just ask the members of the ING group just to raise their hands to those who want to speak in this session so the Chairman can make a list. So we've got Councillor Paul Thorogood, Councillor Bob Wright and Councillor Michael Stones, Chairman. So at your discretion, the orders to be taken. Thank you.
Councillor Thorogood, please.
Yeah, I just want to say that if the charge goes ahead, it would be the equivalent of around a 25% increase in the BDC precept of the council tax if you're in Band D. And during the recent election, Councillor Finch and I in the Kelvin and Fearing ward campaigned very hard, and during the election on the doorstep this green bin charge came up quite a lot, and it was on our leaflets that we were against it. And I do think, and we did increase our vote share by a considerable amount in Kelvin and Fearing, and we had one of the highest turnouts, or if not the highest turnout, in the Braintree district at over 40%.
Sorry, Councillor Thorogood, that wasn't part of the call-in, so I can't continue to allow you to go along that line.
Okay. Okay, can I just add that I understand that it costs about £12 a year to collect a green bin, each green bin, but the charge is for £55. So I just want to know why it's such a high amount, why the council isn't just looking to charge £12 to cover the cost, and is instead looking to make a profit. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thorogood. Councillor Wright, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd like to talk about the take-up rates for councils in neighbouring boroughs. Brentwood have had this charging for 21 years. They're currently standing at a 21% take-up rate. If we have a first year as well as Harlow, our take-up rate will be 0.3%. Tendring started off at 3.8%, rising to 21%. Uttersfield, 5%, rising to 20%. So I think when we state that there's a 10% likelihood and a 60% drop in current rates, the answers are all in the report.
Thank you. Councillor Stones, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to talk about value for money in particular. We seem to be facing a double whammy. So the first is the loss of the recycling credits from Essex County Council, which is stated in the report. And the second one is the additional cost of landfill tax, which could be incurred by somebody in the event that more green waste goes into the grey bins. An estimate is that currently a green bin takes about 1/3 of a tonne over the course of a year. We've got 60,000 green bins. That equates to 18,000 tonnes per annum. Now, when we talk about landfill, that's 1.8 million. If we said 20% of that, essentially can't be avoided. If we said that 20% of that was to find its way back into the grey bin, we could be looking at a bill of £367,000 on top of the loss of the climate credits that we currently get from Essex, which I appreciate are declining. We haven't really spoken about revenue generation either. So how could we generate revenue rather than try and cut costs? If we look at curbside collection, which we are and is fully mentioned in the report, we could be collecting small electrical items at a charge per item. That could be done, be very effective and enable us to generate revenue rather than costing it, and avoid hitting this wonderful service, which has actually enabled our Stanway abated carbon capture, i.e. landfill, operating for an additional 4 years at no extra cost. So my concern is that these measures will have a detrimental impact across the finances of this administration and Essex, but also significantly impact the climate change credentials of this administration as well, and people won't know what to do. There's been a sticker put on our black bins or our grey bins asking us not to put food waste in because there's some money available from the government to do that, but it absolutely explicitly doesn't mention green waste, which is a massive oversight, and people won't know. It's not clear. So it will go in the green bin, it will go in the black bin, it will go to landfill, and it will end up costing somebody, us, you, a lot of money, and that can be avoided by a change of decision. And we need to look at options which are much more public friendly, and we can only do that by talking to the public more. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Stanton. Right. Thank you, members. Please can I now move on to the Cabinet members and invite them to set out their reasoning behind the decision taken on the 10th of July. Councillor Tom Cunningham, as you went first at the informal meeting, may I ask you to start this evening? Councillor Cunningham.
Chairman, just before we start, I'll do a general and then pass over to Councillor Cunningham and Councillor Bowers as the financial cabinet holder as well. Can I start by saying I do accept that this is an issue which has raised quite a bit of public interest. I think we would all rather not be in a position whereby we would need to introduce charges for this service if we could, but we have to be realistic, and members, I'm sure, will be aware that local government has suffered nearly a quarter, 25% cut in the amount of funding it has had from central government over the last few years, and we have to look at ways in which, if we are to continue to provide our statutory services, then we have to see ways in which that can be done. It is interesting that tonight's debate is very, very similar, almost word for word, to the debate which I watched of Huntingdon District Council, which is run by independents, together with the Green Party, the Labour Party and the Liberal Democrats, who have decided to introduce a charge for this service at the sum of £56. And last week, I was interested to see that Cheshire East, which is a purely Labour-controlled council, has also decided to introduce charges. Perhaps not unusual, Chairman, given that the three of us, Huntingdon, Cheshire East and ourselves, are in the very small minority of authorities that do not charge for this service at present. In terms of the issue of consultation and the particular point that was I think raised by Councillor Jeffries from the Labour Party, that there are many new members. That is correct. But if one was to follow her logic, it would mean that the budget meeting in the final year of an administration wouldn't take place until after the elections. Well, everyone knows that we have to set a budget in February, and this was, no one is disputing that, part of the budget arrangements. And also it was made quite clear at the Cabinet meeting in March that a decision would need to be taken by whatever administration was in power following the local elections, would need to be taken in May. So I fully understand why the opposition feel very strongly on this. Got to be honest, the Conservative Party are doing exactly the same in Cheshire East and in Huntingdonshire. There seems to be something in our minds depending on whether you are having to run a council or whether you have the luxury of being in opposition. That's all I want to say by way of a general introduction. I'll now pass over, Chairman, to Councillor Cunningham as the Cabinet Member.
Chairman, thank you. And following on from Councillor Butland, who has actually, I have to say, dealt with many of the overarching points underpinning this call-in. From the outset, can I once again thank you and the governance team for facilitating this meeting as you did the informal conversation on Thursday. I think it's right we go through this process. I would just like to take the opportunity to apologise to our residents who have been contacting customer services, asking when they're able to take up and pay for this new all-year-round service. And I'd like to make a particular apology to the lady resident who travelled in by bus to Causeway House in order to sign up for the new collection service. I'm sorry she was unable to do that for obvious reasons. But with regard to the points in the call-in, I think the Leader of the Council has made it very clear how we go about our budgetary process. And the budgetary process here is always open to scrutiny. And I think I certainly remember, and Cabinet colleagues remember, I remember being with Councillor McKee, former Councillor McKee in particular, where we had a very vigorous grilling on the budget process. A lot of very, very sound, well-made questions by members who are members of that authority and are still members of that authority and are quite legitimately raising the same questions. It was very much in the public's consciousness, and as I found going to parish councils, quite probing questions were raised about it. So I think we have to perhaps dispel the slight myth that may be created that somehow this was a decision taken totally out of the blue, without any knowledge or without any public attention whatsoever. I think the reality is actually otherwise. And indeed, Councillor Thorogood alluded to that during his successful campaigning in the Kelvedon and Fearing area. I also just want to push back on some of these points regarding take-up rates. Yes, there are the figures that have been modelled are on the very cautious side. It would be financially, it would not be financially prudent to do anything but model on cautious rates of take-up. And I think, as I said it may have been Cabinet or may have been full council, that there will be a period of transition. That's understandable, where regrettably we can expect a drop-off. But I think to automatically assume there will be the drop-off in the dramatic rates that some of our opposition members are suggesting tonight, I think is supposition. In the same way, it's supposition that when the recycling centres went to a booking system, suddenly there would be a huge public outcry and they wouldn't be used. Customer service, and I understand customer satisfaction levels for that service are increasing month by month as our residents adapt to a new way of working. In the same way, I think we have to appreciate that comments suggesting that there will be a rise in fly tipping on the back of this policy are again somewhat speculative and somewhat, I think, misguided in terms of a little bit of scaremongering. I think the suggestion that somehow residents of this district, when having an additional change to their service provision imposed upon them, will suddenly take the nuclear option of resulting to breaking the law, I think is a little bit far-fetched, and I think we need to be a little bit more cautious in how we convey legitimate concerns on certain matters, not to be seen to be scaremongering. But of course, underpinning the idea of take-up and the proposals on take-up figures and the suggested modelling on take-up figures is the assumption that some of these residents had a green bin free service before the charge was implemented. Like everything in life, what you don't have, you don't miss. So if there wasn't a free green garden waste collection service, it is quite likely that take-up would be reduced because residents have managed to manage without that service, that discretionary service. I think there's some very good points made by Councillor Staines in terms of, okay, what can you do on income generation? Yes, absolutely, and this authority, through its operations, operates a very effective tradeway service, which is generating an income, and has in the past and will continue to look at other options in which we can generate income. But these are not income streams that can be turned off overnight, and they're certainly not income streams that will deal with a structural deficit which this administration will need to face up to over the next 3 and 4 year period. So there are other options, as I say, for income generation, not overnight. We'll continue to look at them, and we will continue to look at opportunities through shared services to see how we can do waste better, how we can collectively, working with other local authorities. The way the waste collection, waste disposal is done over a 2-tier structure is complicated, and it's not just Braintree District Council that has skin in the game. Obviously, it's dependent on our working relationships with Essex County Council. And actually, Chairman, forgive me, I think it's appropriate, as we are talking about wider waste issues, I do declare myself as a member of Essex County Council, and others perhaps may wish to do the same. I don't think I can add anything else anything else at this moment. Thank you, Chairman. But what I will do is I will pass over to my colleague, Councillor Bowers, who will perhaps deal with some of the more overarching financial aspects of the call-in process. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Cullen. Councillor Bowers, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I'd like to address some of the points that have been made this evening, but also the wider point from the financial position of the Council. During the introductions from, I think Councillor Finker made the point in regards, is this just a financial decision? And I think I'd just like to address that point myself, which I did do on the night of the Cabinet when the decision had been made. And we need to take into consideration that we currently have in the MTFS a budget gap of £2 million in this authority. There was a £644,000 predicted £644,000 shortfall in this financial year that we were covering by balances, but we cannot continue to do that. I did mention, or during what I said at that Cabinet meeting, when I think I speak for all of us, in the ideal circumstances, looking at the possibility of needing to charge for garden waste isn't something that we would want to be considering, especially in a current cost of living crisis that we find ourselves in. However, with the budget gap we have, and one that could easily get larger as we move forward, this isn't something that we cannot be considering. And I think it also goes back to Councillor Butler made the point earlier about probably the difference between those running the council and those being in opposition, because these are the tough decisions that have to be made. Unfortunately, they have to be made, but they do have to be made. And then this is where all the financial modelling come from, and which was all produced or is in the Cabinet report. Now, I do take on board that corporate finance is a complex issue, and I know I'm one of the forerunners to get more training for our new members and our existing members on corporate finance in this year ahead of the next year's budget process, which I think every sort of member will benefit from. But at the end of the day, we are where we are with this financial gap. Now, going back to the point that Councillor Abbott was alluding to about the yearly increases not being consulted on. Now, it is clear in the Cabinet report that on Note 2, under the table of the financials for the coming years, Note 2 reads, the subscriptions charge for 25-26 and beyond is subject to review as part of the corporate annual fees and charges review. So it is not set in stone. The £55, yes, but any rises in subsequent years is not set in stone, and it is up for review and will be discussed in future budget setting processes. Just to touch on the openness and the transparency of the Cabinet report and the decision and that kind of thing. This it's been alluded to about being talked about from 2018 and up until the present day. But also in regards to the openness and the transparency, and Councillor Abbott has been one that always said about our transparent processes in regards to our budget setting, and has always applauded us for that. And then also in the budget paper in February, it wasn't shied away from. It was clearly mentioned about the potential of charging for garden waste, and there was money put aside for looking at that option. But it was detailed in the actual report. About this, so it wasn't not being transparent. Then a report was brought to the last Cabinet meeting of the previous administration. So it's not something that has changed and not been sort of signposted. I take on board the comments that were made by the Labour group, because all the Labour group are new or returning members but weren't part of the previous administration. But these decisions, and I think Councillor Butland mentioned it, says we can't keep delaying at the end of the day, and that's what we have to do as the administration in regard to our budget position. And also, just to touch on, I know Councillor Cunningham addressed it, but the point about our take-up, how we've modelled our take-up in the 10% for the first year, 20% for the second year, 26% is the take-up at break-even point on year 3. But we have to be financially prudent, and it was in the Cabinet report. When you look at Brentford, initial take-up, first year 7.3%, Harlow 0.3%, Morden 3.5%, Tendring 3.8%, Uttlesford 5%. So the 10% is an achievable figure, but at the end of the day, we have to be financially prudent. We can't just pluck a number, put it in the air and just hope for the best at the end of the day, and then hopefully with the financial modelling and how this will be communicated. And Councillor Cunningham has also already referenced there are residents in this district who are looking forward to this service and having the all-round service now compared to the break and that kind of thing. So there are some advantages to it. But yeah, I think that's all I just wanted to say tonight, is just to address the financial position, because at the end of the day, that is not going away. And just to finish off, from my point in, I don't believe at any part of this call, either of these call-ins, has it actually mentioned where we will cover that gap. So if we don't charge for garden waste, there is no point in any of this call-in that's actually covered where we would find that gap. It's a discretionary service. There's a number of discretionary services that I mentioned at the Cabinet meeting, like community support and development, community and wellbeing, citizen advice funding, health development, economic development, planning enforcement. They're all things that we would have to look at if we don't proceed with this. So from a financial point of view, I need to give that realism, and that's what I did at the Cabinet meeting, that if we don't proceed with this decision, then we would have to look at the other areas of the council, because we will have that financial gap that's only going to get larger going forward. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Bowers. Are there any other members of the Cabinet that wish to speak? Thank you. Thank you. Can I ask if any of the officers wish to clarify any points?
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to make a few comments around the options that members have been talking about this evening, and just to say from an officer point of view, when we looked at as part of the project management process, we looked at various options. One of the critical factors, really, in terms of the decision to opt for maintaining the existing service on a fortnightly basis, was the Resources and Waste Strategy for England 2010, and also the Environment Act 2021, which is the legislation that underpins the Resources and Waste Strategy, where the government effectively set out proposals to achieve a consistency in household waste collections in order to avoid confusion to customers, and also to ensure a better quality of material that was actually collected as part of the service. And that was the sort of critical factor that influenced the officer thinking at that time in terms of the decision to propose the existing service on a fortnightly basis. Yes, other options could have been considered in terms of looking at a variation or hybrid arrangement in terms of a monthly collection, a 6-weekly collection, but that would not achieve the consistency in the household waste collection the government set out. And also, we would have to factor in the cost of providing what would be a hybrid service, but also the potential confusion to residents who some might receive a fortnightly collection, others might receive a monthly collection, and others a 6-weekly collection. So what I'm trying to say here is that effectively we've ensured a consistency in the collection to avoid those issues from arising by making sure that we actually adopt the current service that we provide, which is the fortnightly collection, as it is now. And obviously some of the proposals set out in the Environment Act are some of the biggest waste reforms in the last decade, if not longer. What some members won't be aware is that last week we received notification from DEFRA that the waste reforms have now been delayed even further, and that the extended producer responsibility, which essentially the government were looking for suppliers and manufacturers to support the cost of providing the changes to, or funding the changes to services, including the consistency in household waste collections, has now been delayed until October 2025, which means that the waste reforms, including the consistent collection, won't be looked at until after that date, which is obviously another 2 years from now. Thank you.
Committee members, do you have any questions that you wish to ask the call-in members, cabinet members or officers?
I'll start it off if you wouldn't mind, Chairman. Just one question as far as the shortfall in finances. I think this is directed at Kevin Bowes. Has there been any other ways you've thought about trying to raise the funds to fill this gap apart from the bin situation? Because obviously there is all sorts of aspects in the council which we can find funds to raise to get the gap closed.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for your question, Mr. Councillor Ramage. Yes, we have done. As part of the previous administration, which I'm aware that you wasn't here for, we have done. We have an investment strategy within the council. We've previously we had a strategic investment group, which then developed into the investment and development programme that I sat on, and Councillor Cunningham sat on, and Councillor Butland sat on, where we did crunch a lot of ideas in regards to what this authority can do, and we continually do that. So we are continually looking at ideas of revenue generation and commercialisation. So we do that. It's not a case of, oh, this was the only game in town at the end of the day. Like saying in an ideal world, I said earlier, we wouldn't want to be doing this, but we find ourselves in the situation we find ourselves in. It seems to be that this is the option we have come to, but I can assure you that ideas are continually being looked at and have been over a number of years. Thank you.
Councillor Beavers, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I've got a few questions I would like to address to Cabinet, and a little bit of context as well, if I may, to put around them. And we spoke several times this evening about the Council's budget, and I think we've always done the budget process jolly well in this authority, and I know Councillor Abbott and myself over the years have complimented the Council on this. But when we talk about the commercialisation agenda in this authority, which we actually started talking about 5 years plus ago, and that agenda was something we were really proud of. And, you know, we decided that we were going to invest in more commercial properties. We put out our leisure facilities that were bringing in £1 million year on year. We put out our housing stock. The idea of that, and then
Can I just, sorry, because
we're
we're going to go into the committee meeting, and I'm advised that that's probably more for our committee meeting rather than this section.
Okay, I'll bring it up in that section. Okay.
Is there anything else you wanted to?
I'll bring it up in that section. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Chairman. Councillor Beavers, do you have any questions for the Cabinet? Because now is the opportunity to ask those questions. You will not have an opportunity in part two, because that's just the debate of the committee. I guess I've got one specific question to Cabinet, and the rest I can bring up in the other part of the meeting. And I would really like to understand that if this service does go ahead, then are we going to go back to giving residents the calendar again? Because there is so much confusion out there on what bins are being collected and when these bins are going to be collected. Chairman, with respect, we're straying into an area of own interest as opposed to the call-in topic, so the questions should really be defined to the call-in topics. Chairman, I'll address that point in the other part of the meeting in my statement. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. I have one question. Is the figure known on how much we would actually have to increase council tax to be able to keep our garden waste collection service free at the point of use?
Councillor Vance.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. I think it's just fair to say that we are governed by referendum principles, and there is a certain level that we can't go to. We can't go beyond every year, and the level we would have to do to increase that would be way beyond that. You know, we're sort of looking at sort of 9%, 10%, something like that. So unfortunate, I say unfortunate, I wouldn't want to do that, but you know, we wouldn't be able to go beyond that because we wouldn't be allowed to. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Toby Williams, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Just a few questions from me. First of all, we've obviously talked a bit about the cost of the new scheme and the cost of not doing it. What about the cost of implementation? So this will obviously be a change. I assume that green bins will be sort of taken away. There'll be changes to the way in which these things are charged. Has there been any calculation made of how much the transition will cost?
Councillor Vance, please.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, we, as part of the budget setting process for this year that came to this council in February, there was a recommendation of the potential of £200,000 being put towards the implementation, the communication, and all things involved in that. So that's basically what that was for, and that was approved in this chamber in February for this year's budget.
Thank you. And just as well, just sort of returning to the topic of choices, because obviously we've heard a fair amount of opposition, but we've heard very little in terms of solutions. Could you talk us through what some of the alternatives would be? I know you've touched on them, but perhaps if you could talk a little bit more about sort of what impact cutting the alternatives would look like, and why that would be less preferable than what you've landed on in terms of the changes to the bin collections.
I guess if we're sorry, Chair. I guess if it's what I was referring to, other things that we may have to look at if we're looking at the financial options and the financial gap, as I reported to Cabinet, the potential would be we would be looking at services that are discretionary services, which basically means we do not have to provide. And some of the numbers that I presented were community support and development and community wellbeing, 228,000, health development, 60,000, external funding to citizens' advice and community 360, 124,000, economic development and business engagement, 231,000, sustainability carbon management, 109,000, and planning enforcement team, 327,000. So these are all just sort of indicative costs, so they're not sort of set in stone, but these are derived from our budget setting last year, and so they would be some of the things that we would potentially have to look at to plug the gap. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Butland, please.
Could I just add to that? I wouldn't want anyone to be under the impression that by introducing charges for green bins, our financial task is complete. Far from it. £2 million we have to find, and that is a significant sum of money. And we have put just under £1 million at the disposal, I put it like that, of the Chief Executive, in terms of transformation that will be needed in the services throughout this council if we are to bridge that gap. And if anybody is under any illusions that one can just spend, then please, when you go home, look at tonight's Panorama programme, which is about Thurrock Borough Council, which did spend, having borrowed, and as a result they have no green waste collection because that has had to be stopped completely. And we are not prepared as an administration to go down that line. There's some more difficult decisions coming down the line. I just wanted members, there's almost a feeling that, well, if we didn't do this, could we do something else and the problem will go away? If we don't do this, we will have to do something else. But even if we do this, we will have to do something else.
And the final one for me, if that's okay, Chairman, thank you. Just in terms of the review that happened earlier this year, can you expand a little bit more on sort of what that looked like and how you came to the conclusion that you did, which was to go ahead with the change? So what did that review look like? How substantial was it? And why was it that you arrived at this conclusion?
Thank you. The review took many forms, primarily waiting for what we hoped and were led to believe would be greater clarity from central government over their approach to these matters. But also it was largely centred around clarification from Essex County Council in terms of confirmation of arrangements going forward, funding available. And really those two, clarification from Essex County Council and greater uncertainty, led us regrettably to this difficult decision that we took last month. This month, early July, sorry, yes.
Thank you. That's all from me. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you. Right then, members. Sorry, Councillor Parker.
Chairman, just a couple of questions, quite short questions. Is it helpful to have in the agenda the benchmarking against the other councils? But I was curious as to when, if the cabinet members are able to give me some indication of how long those councils have been charging for their collections, for their green waste collections. And the second short question was whether there's been mention of the recycling targets. I think a lot of people, certainly in rural areas, will be home composting their green waste. Is there any way that that can be included in the numbers for the targets for recycling? Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Parker.
Thank you, Chairman. And just if I may deal with Councillor Mrs Parker's second point first regarding home composting. I mean, I'll get clarification from the officer on that. I think this is something that we want to do all we can ourselves at Greenwich District Council and working others to promote. And I think looking at every opportunity, every initiative to support that. In terms of the longevity of the service, I will just ask Mr Partridge to comment on that, and also through you, Chairman, if that's okay, and also perhaps maybe if he could comment on home composting and the practicalities of that actually being included in our recycling figures, and and perhaps maybe Mr Mars may want to say something too about a wider performance management as well in the authority. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have the specific information in terms of when each of the authorities in Essex introduced the charge of garden waste service. Suffice to say, a number of them have been doing that a number of years. I think Harlow was Brentwood was the first one to roll it out, followed by Harlow, and then other councils have followed suit. And you'll see within the original appendix, we'd set out some dates there when some of the other authorities introduced. Basildon, for example, are introducing it this year. And in the first 2 weeks of their launch, they had something like 27,000 customers that signed up to it. And my understanding is that's now increased to 30,000 plus in the last 6 week period. But charging for green waste is not a new issue in Essex. Is what I can say. As I said, I don't have the exact detail in terms of the specific dates, but we are other than Chelmsford City Council, who are not proposing to charge a garden waste, we are the only other authority that currently wasn't going to charge. All of the other Essex authorities were where they provide a single collection of garden waste every fortnight. There are two councils that provide mixed and food waste collections, and therefore they cannot charge. But ourselves and Colchester, who are the other authority looking to charge next year, were the final two. In terms of home composting, Again, this home compost is not a new issue. In Braintree, we used to be one of the highest performing authorities in terms of residents buying compost bins that are subsidised by Essex County Council. And again, it's an established practice that many of the residents undertake. I don't have the actual specific figures to hand, but obviously with the garden waste service, we've always given the option to residents to actually compost their green waste, and a great many, I'm sure, will do that based on the number of compost bins that have been sold really over the last 8, 9, 10 years plus in Essex, in Braintree, sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Ramage?
Yeah, there's just one other question which, unfortunately, whenever a decision like this happens, there's always a group that kind of suffers more than anyone else, and it's been brought up by the Labour and G&I group as well, is the elderly. And I wondered, is it early yet, but is there any provisions that you've taken into consideration how you're going to deal with that side of our community?
Could I just respond on... Sorry, Chairman.
Sorry, Councillor.
I don't think we should fall into the trap of just identifying one unit, elderly. I'm probably one of the oldest people in this chamber tonight. I'm in my mid-70s. Am I elderly? Probably. That doesn't mean to say that every elderly person will need. A lot of younger people may be suffering disabilities as well. So all I want to say, Chairman, is when we're looking at areas of those parts of the community that may need specific help, I don't think we should just automatically assume because someone has reached a certain age, they suddenly become less active, etc. There are a lot of people who are very active, so we will look and consider any specific cases where there is proven hardship for an individual, in the way that we did when we introduced the grey bins over the years. Remember, first of all, in fact, it was our colleagues on the other side who first introduced the grey bin collection in Whittam. And I think the success that we had in introducing that was the work, I'm going to say it, of Mr. Partridge and his team, who worked extremely well with individuals, and where there were problems, they were willing to see whether there were ways in which it could be done. I just wanted to flag that up, that it's not all elderly people who will be done. There will be others as well.
Thank you. Right. Thank you, members. If there are no further questions...
Sorry. I just have one more question, if that's all right. Could it be a consideration that we turn to maybe a referendum to increase council tax or something by X amount to keep this free, keep the 88% of people using it, keep residents happier? Then in that way, ultimately, the residents are deciding, the public are getting their opinion across here.
John, I would say a referendum on this will not solve the whole of the financial challenge facing this council. And I have to be fair, this council has one of the smallest financial challenges of any council in Essex. And in terms of a referendum, yes, you would need to have a referendum, but if people have been saying, look, you haven't consulted, and people don't like the idea of paying £52 or £55 a year, but however in a referendum they would vote to have a higher than 3% increase in council tax, I don't think one would win that referendum, to be quite honest.
Right, thank you, members. Right, I do want to be careful that we don't stray off of the reason that we are here.
Chairman, at this part of our process, just questions from the membership. I believe Councillor Abbott is indicating he may have a question that he wishes to ask, but it's your discretion whether you permit it, Chairman.
Councillor Abbott, last question, please, before we move on to part two.
Thank you for your indulgence, Chairman. Yes, very specific question on 2 points. In the Cabinet members' responses, why did they not address two of the clauses in the ING group call-in? One, the fall in performance of recycling against target, which is a policy issue, and second, the potential fall in performance against climate change policies.
Thank you, Councillor Abbott. Anybody else?
Chairman, I know the points that Councillor Abbott has made, but he will also be aware that actually there has been a regrettable trend in recycling over some time. And of course that means a collective effort to address that. And that's well beyond just the purview of Braintree District Council. But forgive me, what was the second point? The fallen... Forgive me, sorry, what was the second point?
The potential impact on climate change policies.
Potential impact on climate change. Yes, sorry. Yeah, thank you. No, I'm glad he's reminded me of that, because I refer to the answer I gave at the informal meeting. This authority is committed to taking, where possible, positive action on climate change. And unlike many other local authorities who declared climate emergency in 2019, it was able to support the formulation of a climate change strategy and action plan, and support it with significant capital over the last few years. And during the COVID period and subsequently, we have been delivering against that action plan. So I repeat the point I made at that meeting. Yes, recycling is, of course, one element of climate change, but climate change and the sustainability agenda stretches well beyond waste collection. And I believe that we, as an overall corporate priority, are performing very well. We're bearing in mind the limitations upon a district council on this wider agenda. I think we're performing very well on this wider agenda.
Right, thank you, members. We're going to move on to part two now, which is, members, as set out previously, this part is for the committee to debate the merits of the notices. The remaining parties are welcome to stay and watch the debate, but will not be able to participate unless there is a question or point of clarification which requires their input. Those that wish to leave, please do so now. Committee members, we have heard the information relating to both call-in notices and from the Cabinet members and officers. We have before us the report by Kim Mayo, Monitoring Officer, which also provides information relating to each of the grounds being called in. It is now for us to consider the information before us with a view to reaching a conclusion on whether we believe that the Cabinet did not take into account any key consideration as part of their decision making. If we believe this to be the case, then we must refer the matter back to Cabinet. If we do not believe this is the case, then the decision of the Cabinet will be confirmed this evening and the scrutiny process will end. Can I remind members that the rules of debate apply to this part of the item? This includes the time limit for speeches. Members, please can you indicate who wish to speak?
At the moment, Chairman.
So, right. Thank you, Councillor Beavers, if you'd like to start.
Thank you, Chairman. And I have a sort of general observations and summary of some of the areas that we have discussed fully this evening. What I will say is this is a new council and a new start. And I embrace the level of scrutiny on such a decision for our residents and indeed our district council. The feeling that I have with this decision taken by Cabinet, and I remember when we rolled out the scheme and we embraced ourselves and congratulated ourselves on how well we were doing for the residents of our district. So I was still quite disappointed when this proposal was being considered, and I do believe that it hasn't been thought through fully. I do believe that all the considerations, particularly from the Independent and Green Group, have not been considered by the Cabinet, particularly in terms of that engagement piece. Within the papers this evening that were forwarded to us some weeks ago for our perusal, we looked at other councils and did some sort of compare and contrast. So let's look at Uttlesford for an example. Yes, they do charge for their bins, but they also have a collection service fortnightly, and it's really well used, and residents can get rid of a whole raft of green waste. And if that service wasn't there, one wonders what their fly tipping target would be in that area. We've looked at other authorities, indeed around the country. Well, let's look no further than Derby, who took a very similar recommendation to us only a number of years ago to charge their residents. And then they found that the commingling of green waste and general waste was so bad that they actually found it in the end cheaper to reissue residents with their green recycling bin, and that service went out for free. And interestingly enough, some of their green bins have turned up on beaches all around Europe, which is really quite disappointing to see, and one would hope that we're going to get the assurances from this authority that, you know, our bins are not going to turn up in countries such as Romania, because in terms of our profile, I don't think that would be particularly helpful. What I was saying earlier on, and I will underline that point, particularly for new members that perhaps don't yet understand the full dynamic of the finances of this council, is that we've been embarking on a transformation and commercialisation agenda for a number of years, and much of that was brought on by a LGA peer review that we had that said we must go down this route and we must invest more in our assets, we must buy up more commercial properties. We transferred our community halls to community groups. We put our leisure services out that brought in this authority £1 million year on year. We scrapped the grants to our town and parish councils. And, you know, quite frankly, one could ask, well, where's all the money gone? You know, we were bringing in this money to protect our services and our revenue and our capital. So again, I'm really disappointed that we're looking at charging for this service, and one begs the question, what next? And that really disappoints me, and I feel that this training later in the year is going to be beneficial to all members, and I hope a lot of engagement as well. To bring my comments to a conclusion, Chairman, I won't be supporting the recommendation by Cabinet. I know my group won't be supporting this. We do believe it needs to go back to Cabinet. We do believe there needs to be more options for us to consider. We haven't considered enough, we haven't engaged enough, and we haven't consulted enough. And finally, if we do decide to go ahead with this, I really do think that if we're talking about being a value for money council, we're very proud of the services that we offer our residents, and residents being of key importance to us, then let's go back and issue a calendar that explains to our residents exactly what they're going to get from their service and when they're going to get it. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Davis. Councillor Caldwell, please.
Thank you, Chairman. I wholly support charging for green bins. I think it's irresponsible to pretend that we can provide free services to people when we're looking at a £2 million hole. I also, not this year, but recently I was talking to some people who lived in a block of flats, effectively, who I don't think necessarily were going to vote for me, but they did complain about the level of council tax. And one of the things they were complaining about was paying for garden waste when they didn't produce any. I think we need to climb down from cloud cuckoo land and face the financial responsibilities and take some hard decisions and support this. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Caldwell. The only thing I will say before we do move on is we are actually discussing the call-in, not the decisions on charging or not charging. Anybody else? Any other member? Councillor Parker, please.
Yes, addressing the thank you, Chairman. Addressing the points in the call-in notice. The first being a failure to consult. I think this, for those of us who were members in the last administration, are aware that this has been an issue that has been sort of debated amongst ourselves, with other members, and with parish councillors over the last 6 months. And it certainly was debated as part of the budget setting process, which is why the council agreed to set aside £200,000 to investigate bringing in the service. So it's not like this has come out of the blue. In terms of consulting the public, I do agree that I don't think there's much purpose in doing that, because the question will be simply, would you like to be charged £55 for a service that you get for free? Well, I'm sure that every single person will say no. So I don't think there's any point in saying that. And as Councillor Courtaulder said, this decision is taken in the background of a very difficult situation that the council faces, and it's our job as councillors to face those tough decisions and keep the council running in a financially well-run way. In terms of being contrary to policy, I think really the only things that have really been put forward are that contrary to policy on recycling rates and contrary to climate change. One of the problems with the recycling rates in terms of is that it does not capture what is composted at home. I personally used to never put anything in my green bin. I've actually started doing it now because I quite like to get rid of some of my really nasty weeds. I compost everything, and I have a very large pile, as do a lot of the residents in my very rural ward. That is not captured in our recycling rates, and it is simply a function of the methodology of providing numbers. It is not a function of whether green waste is being composted. It is being composted at home, just not at the Essex County Council facility. So I don't think that would be contrary to policy. In terms of climate change, I think if we were talking about plastic waste or something like that, there would probably would be an implication. But if garden waste is being composted in a pile in someone's garden, or it's composted in Essex County Council facilities, it won't make any difference to climate change. This material still has to decompose and will produce any gases that it will produce. So I don't think there is a significant contrary to policy. In terms of whether the decision is unreasonable, I have looked in detail at the decisions and the reasons that have been given for this decision. I think the Cabinet have and the officers have looked in considerable detail at all the alternatives. They have looked at what has gone on in other councils. They've looked at, the advantage not, of course, being one of the last councils consider introducing this, is you can see what the take-up has been, what the effect has been in other councils. And I think they has done a thorough job at investigating the options. And so I don't think that ground is founded. Again, I just would reiterate again that the background to all this is as Councillor Butler and the other councillors and just members said right there at the beginning, is this, how do we close this budget gap? I'm sure none of us would like to introduce additional charges, but again, as I said, this is sometimes we do have to make these as difficult decisions. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Parker. Right. Thank you, councillors. There be no other members wishing to speak. I'm going to put the vote to the vote. Members, I will be seeking your vote shortly, and this will be by way of show of hands. Members, you will only be permitted to vote once, and I will take each of the options in turn. Members, please can you indicate by way of show of hands whether you believe the Cabinet should reconsider their decision taken on the 10th of July 2023 regarding the Garden Green Waste Collection Service.
Chairman, that is 2 votes for that.
Those against, please.
Chairman, that is 6 votes.
Thank you, members. So that's it now.
It is, Chairman. You've taken the vote on the options available to the Scrutiny Committee this evening, and you've got a clear indication from the membership of the Corporate Scrutiny Committee that they do not wish for this matter to be referred back to Cabinet for reconsideration.
And as a result, the original decision taken on the 10th of July 2023 shall be confirmed and shall take effect at the conclusion of this meeting. I must also remind members that there is no further opportunity for this decision to be called in as set out in CPR 1720. Therefore, members, as I close the meeting, this concludes our business tonight. our next scheduled meeting of this committee is the 11th of October 2023. I would like to thank everybody for their participation this evening. I mean, as has been said many times, this is the first call-in that's taken part in this council for well over 10 years. I think the way it has been conducted has been very professional by all parties. So I think the debate has been sensible. The result hasn't gone the way many people wanted it to tonight, but I think it is something that we can all take forward and learn from. I thank the staff that are here with me, and I thank you all and wish you all a safe journey home. Thank you, members.
Thank you, Chair.